Hi, I'm Jennifer Garcia, and I'm going to share with you today some things that I've learned about how to have a transformative school. To begin with, you have to have some self-awareness, and that is all related to social emotional intelligence. Second, you have to have a really effective team. And lastly, you need to have a skill set that's related to systems and operations that you'll be able to roll out a program in a school that's going to lead to transformative outcomes for our young people. We're going to begin with social emotional awareness and intelligence. You would never believe that I'm an introvert, but I actually am. My biggest fear in becoming a principal 7 years ago was having to face an audience of folks consistently day in and day out. And it took me about 4 years to really get comfortable with it, but I was able to finally do it. About 4 years ago, I was asked to speak in front of a group of Hollywood's elite through a foundation that we work with. And I remember being terrified the moment that I walked up onto that stage. But after I got out 2 or 3 minutes of a monologue that I had prepared poorly and messed up I'm messing it up now. I messed up the joke that I was supposed to present. Did not land well at all. I got past it. I walked off the stage and I realized this is now something that I've been able to overcome and learn how to do and how to navigate in the role of a principal. And so being an introvert, even though I'm self-aware about it, doesn't become a hindrance in my ability to lead a school. So that's one example. There are many examples that you need to think about as you take a position of leadership and you think about areas that you need to grow in. Social emotional intelligence comes first. How well you know yourself and how well you know you're going to be able to navigate challenging areas. So when teachers are upset and you're moving a mile a minute and you know this is something that's going to trigger you, how do you stop and slow down so that you're able to better prepare for that meeting with that teacher? There's other things that you need to know about yourself. Are you able to manage multiple tasks at once? If not, what are some things that you need to do to prepare? So one way to do that would be to maybe create a daily checklist. Every day when I sit down and I come to my office, I look at my calendar and I know, okay, these are all the things that have to get done today. These are the meetings that I have to have. How am I prioritize them? Because I'm self-aware and I recognize that if I don't have a system to keep me accountable, I'm going to start to become less successful and less effective in my role. So those are things that I think about as a leader as I approach leadership. What are some other areas that I need to think about? When I hear folks talk about students in a negative way, that's something that really upsets me. But as a school leader, I'm responsible for bringing everybody along. How am I able to better engage in conversation with people without being responsive to all the things that are happening with me? My blood is boiling, I might be starting to sweat a little bit, right? How can I temper that so that I can actually enlist folks? Because most of the time when people are responding negatively, it's because they're under stress. And if I, as a leader, am self-aware and am able to dodge the stress, kind of like the Matrix movie, then I'm able to better prepare a team so that they can also engage in these behaviors. If we think of a framework around discourse in schools, there's discourse 1 and there's discourse 2. Discourse 1 is kind of the traditional way that perhaps you grew up in school where folks were phrasing everything as these kids can't, these teachers can't, the system above us can't, right? It's kind of a culture of complaint. Whereas discourse 2 is much more productive. It's the culture of commitment. They both need to exist. Folks need to sometimes be able to say stuff so they can move into a more productive talk around discourse 2. But how you as the site leader manage those conversations is really about how self-aware you are. If you're aware that when someone starts to say these kids, as opposed to our kids, you're going to become upset. The more you're aware of that and you're able to temper those emotions, the better able you are to actually bring folks along with you. I know in my experience as a principal, initially when I wasn't seasoned and I was still responding from the visceral level, I was always really quick to jump on someone and say, we don't talk about kids that way here. Not the best strategy, but I had to learn that the more aware I was when that was coming up, what was coming up for me was that I wanted to protect our students, which is a human and a natural response, but I also have to bring a team on. And in order to bring a team on, I have to approach folks where they are and equip them with some skills so that they can actually get where I need them to be. The second part of the conversation, we're going to talk about how to build an effective team. But if you don't have the self-awareness about what triggers you or upsets you from adults, you're not actually able to build a team so that people come along with you to the vision of transformative education. So that's one such example, helping folks shift discourse from 1 to 2, culture of complaint to a culture of commitment. And it takes a lot of finesse and the ability to know exactly when you're upset in order to help people move in the direction that you need them to move. So if you haven't spent some time looking inward and thinking about, these are the things that upset me, one suggestion I have would be just to write them all down. These are all the things that I've heard, or I know when I hear them, I'm going to have a response, so that you can proactively plan in your head how you might respond. Sometimes role-playing helps also with a peer or a colleague, so that you can actually prepare to engage in those conversations. So another thing to consider as you lead from the inside out is thinking about, what are the ways in which you take care of yourself as a leader? Emotional care. So as a site leader, many things are going to come to you that you're going to have to hold. Some of them you have to hold privately because that's in your job description, and some of them you might be able to hold with someone else. However, holding all that stuff can really get to you, can really wear on you. We have to acknowledge that leadership is emotional, and it's human to experience emotion. Emotion can come out in so many ways. Folks are comfortable with emotion as anger. Some are comfortable with emotion showing more feeling. Either way, there's no blame or judgment are appropriate, but it's having the self-awareness to recognize when you're sitting in a space of emotion. Because when you are, depending on the situation, you may have a different response. It's okay to pause and say, I'm not ready to answer that question when you're emotional. Or when you're emotional and it's a matter of protecting, it's okay to move in that direction if you know in your instinct this is about protecting a situation. But you as the individual have to be able to decide where you are exactly and which direction you want to move and how to temper all of that. And that only comes from taking time to delve into yourself. So having a practice like meditation, or having a practice like exercise, or having a practice like journaling, these are all ways in which leaders have the skill set to turn inside and to determine where they are. You can only stay in leadership if you have a way of tempering all the emotion that you carry, whether it's anger or sadness, or sometimes it's a combination of both. Sometimes it's grief, many times it's joy. But in those moments when we're having to deal with a student who's been arrested, or a parent and family that are homeless, or a deliverable that's come down from the home office that you may not be in alignment with. Those are all things that can happen all in the same day. It's how you respond and knowing what your response is going to be for yourself, and how to process and digest that emotion later is really paramount to being able to lead a school with clarity and fidelity. So take a look at this video. It compares empathy and sympathy. It's actually quite humorous, but it should help you kind of think about both how to be understanding for yourself, but as we start to transition into how to support folks on a team, it really helps you hold a really good frame for what we should do with social emotional intelligence with others.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Welcome back. I hope that helped you think about some ways in which you can care for yourself and be empathetic to yourself when situations arise, as well as helping support others so that you can build a team. Now we're going to talk about effective teams in schools and the importance of a team as you start to shift a school into a transformative place for our young people. If I have to think about all of the years that I've been a principal now at a school site for 7, the thing that I hold on to the most is that I have a super effective team around me. Now I have a whole school site team, and then I have other teams that are responsible for larger parts of the school. If you're not aware of the importance of team as a principal, you're going to fall short in being able to deliver achievement gains for kids, achievement gains for parents, achievement gains for your staff. So let's actually start with the importance of team as we look at teacher preparation and development. So as you're thinking about hiring, you need to ask yourself in that interview, is this person going to be effective in their role as a teacher in front of kids? Is this person going to be effective with the team that they sit on? And is this person going to be able to be developed as a teacher? One of the things that I always look at when I am interviewing a candidate is how well they collaborate, because collaboration is essential and critical to building a school site team that's effective. Oftentimes you find out that folks aren't collaborative when you 2 or 3 months into the school year, when they're like, I don't want to go to that meeting, or I don't want to share my lesson, or I don't want to participate in this learning walk. That's usually a flag that says, probably not the right person for the team. What I've learned, and someone who's, an introvert, like I had stated earlier, doesn't generally work in teams, likes to work by herself. I've had to learn the importance of collaboration for the school as well as for the teachers. Teachers grow so much more rapidly when they're immersed in a collaborative setting, when they're working with folks and are able to pivot in different directions based on the experiences of the other peers in that group. Collaboration is key to transformative schools. Now, you have to create the conditions so that can happen. For example, your master schedule has to allow for opportunities for folks to collaborate, because folks they worked a whole day. They don't want to have to stay 2 hours after school and work with somebody else. You have to figure out a way to create a system in your school that emphasizes collaboration. Similarly, you have to create systems in the classroom that emphasize collaboration, because collaboration is key. We also know that's one of the 21st century skills that our young people need to have in order to navigate university and career. Folks are looking for people who can get along well with each other and actually collaborate on projects. So I talk about this because I think it's really important that we examine what are the kind of behaviors that we see that show effective collaboration. We'll start with personal regard. Folks have to have personal regard for each other in a team, right? They have to feel like they're in a community. They have to feel like they're doing this work together for a greater purpose. When you have that sense, you actually start to make some traction in the work that you want to do. They have to actually respect each other. If they don't respect each other, they're not going to be able to collaborate in a manner that's authentic. It's just going to be going through the motions of collaboration as opposed to really going deep and creating products that are useful to our young children and their futures. And lastly, of course, we have to work with some integrity on a team. If we say we're going to do something, we need to own that we're going to do it. And if we're not, we need to be able to explain why. I have found in observing the most effective teams at the school site, teams that have those three components are the most effective. They make the most gains for kids, and they make the most gains for themselves as professionals. Schools thrive when teachers are learning. If you can walk into a school and talk to a teacher about their professional development experience at that school site, and they're able to identify areas that they've grown in that year, you know that that's an indicator of school success. There will be an indicator of academic growth for our young people. We can't expect teachers and students to work in isolation. They have to work together, and teachers have to model what they expect kids to do. So if we expect kids to be collaborative, teachers should be held to the same expectation. I, as the principal, need to be held to the same expectation to be collaborative with other principals or other colleagues. This is the only way that I also grow and thrive. So as you think about hiring and building your team and having the self-awareness, because you've identified that that's something that you need to have, you also need to think about bias, implicit bias that comes up through the hiring process. Take a few moments to watch this video.
What would the world look like if everybody were aware of the stereotypes that they have and the biases that they have? When we talk about unconscious bias, we're basically saying our worldview can actually exert an influence beyond our conscious awareness, and it creates ambiguity.
You go to an engineer who's built something extremely innovative, and you say, who do you think your user is? This is where I have the most fun. My name is TV Raman, and I led our work on Android accessibility for 3 years. Write down everything that you think you know about your user with respect to abilities, inabilities, special abilities, disabilities. Almost every assumption that you write down on that whiteboard about this is the user I think I'm building for is questionable, because our various unconscious biases define the boundaries you're unwilling to expand.
These biases, they're the shortcuts that our brain has created so that we can deal with the information that we process every single day.
Right when we see anyone, whether we think about it or not, we are implicitly, automatically making judgments about how warm and competent that person or thing is.
All humans need to make decisions, and so we fill in the blanks because our brains are wired to do that, and we fill in with things we don't know with, past experience. Oh, you pattern map to someone I think I should hire, so I'm going to hire you versus this person because they didn't map, because I can't fill in the blank because they don't look like me, or they're not from my same background, and so I can't see how they're going to make the jump.
Every single person is great at things that you may not expect them to be, but it's really hard for us to see that when we're so powerfully guided by the things we expect to be true in the world.
I grew up surrounded with this conversation about what you can't do and what you won't be able to do. My name's Enrico, and I'm an autistic software engineer. The first time I go through the performance review process, I was asked for 5 strengths. It was the first time that I had ever been prompted to think in that way about myself, and it was really a life-changing moment for me.
When we are working in our day-to-day jobs, we are still making judgments about the people around us, about the resumes we see, about the employees that we're trying to decide, whether to put them on teams or not.
People are very wedded to the idea that they can perceive something objectively, and statistically they're wrong, but it's hard. You become attached to this idea that you can assess something by looking at it.
These subtle assumptions we make about people can have lasting effects on who we're promoting, who we're hiring, who we're putting in leadership positions. We have the responsibility to understand the assumptions that we make and understand the errors that we make.
But it's not just for the collective good. If you take the time to understand more about this, there are things that you can implement for yourself that'll help you develop as a leader and to do your job even better.
It made me realize how often I have a very strong belief that is simply incorrect. When I look at one of these evaluation situations, the first question is, how can I eliminate the sources of potential bias and leave just the data so we can actually make better decisions?
If you're not conscious of the biases that you have, you're just not contributing at the level that you could, and you're not innovating at the level you could. And so your products won't be as good. Your results won't be as good.
When you think outside the box with respect to the assumptions you made about how somebody would use this wonderful thing you built, and when you sort of broaden that perspective as to who you change the world for, you build something even bigger.
I hope that video helped you think about how we as human beings are operating from the way in which our brain functions, which is we're looking for patterns, right? Our brain is trained to do two things, or it's not trained, but our brain is hardwired to do two things: seek pleasure and seek patterns. So in our brain, if it's been patterned to signal a certain thing, we either avoid it or we engage in it, right? Because we're also looking for pleasure. When we're looking for folks to come onto our team, we want to present a diverse team for our young people, because outside of school, they're going to experience the world that has diversity. And as we become more and more of a global society, and as we prepare more for the 21st century, we really need to make sure our young people are equipped. And so thinking about that, thinking about diversity of gender, diversity of ethnicity, diversity of learning style, diversity of socioeconomic status. These are all things that we must consider as we build an effective team, because this richness of difference actually helps our young people grow their skill set and be able to navigate the world much more readily and equipped than you or I, as folks who perhaps didn't have that consideration in building an effective team. So as you think about your team, you should ask yourself this question: where are the school's strengths and where are their areas of growth? Where in, not so much the team, but let's give an example, a concrete one. Let's say, for example, your school is really making a lot of progress in the humanities. Your academic growth targets have been met, and you've accelerated growth in a particular subgroup of students, but maybe not so much in your math and science department. How do you approach that with a team of folks who are working just as hard as the other team, but are not getting the same amount of the same types of outcomes? Well, first you have to actually look at the team. Who's on that team? Where are their skill sets? Where are their areas of growth? Are they all new teachers? Are they a mix of veteran teachers? How are the team dynamics in their department meetings? And as you kind of sit back and take an inquiry lens, you're able to gather more information and data that helps you make more informed choices about how to support that team so that they can make growth. Right? Sometimes a team composition is made up of folks who perhaps are not equipped with all the teaching strategies that they need, but are afraid to ask. It's your job as the leader of that group to go in to diagnose and to assess, but not to problem solve. Problem solving has to come from the team. You lead the team through problem solving. You have to help them see where the areas of challenge are in order for them to make growth. Otherwise, it just becomes a Band-Aid policy, and it's not something that has a lot of depth. So then the teachers don't actually grow enough, and you don't make long-term traction for your school. So that's one thing to consider as you're looking at the team. Where are their areas of strength? How do you acknowledge that? And where are their areas for growth? And how do you support them to see those areas and to come up with a plan? So let's imagine that you have a school site team that is dysfunctional and they're not able to deliver on appropriate conduct, or more importantly, they're just not getting along well with each other. There's a lot of water cooler talk. There's a lot of parking lot talk. How do you address that as the site leader, and how do you build from that? Is it something that you disassemble, or is it something that you're able to repair? And that's the importance of inquiry, where you, as the site leader, ask a lot of questions, do a lot of observations, and decide whether or not this is a team that needs structure, or is it a team that there's just really a caustic person there that you need to talk and address with, or is it all of them? What's the real issue? You have to be able to diagnose and assess that issue. Now, let's say, for example, it's just one or two people who are not able to come along to the school's vision. Well, then that's not about the team. That's a conversation that you as a site leader need to have with that person. Ask why. Is it that they're really not aligned, or is it that they feel that they don't have the skills necessary in order to deliver on that vision? If it's a skill issue, well, that's something that you can easily remedy by helping them with those skills. If it's a will issue, that's something totally different. If they're not willing, then it's a conversation of this might not be the best fit for you. Without blame or judgment, without any sort of, it doesn't have to be handled in a harsh manner. It can be a real conversation with, here's where we are, here's where we're going. Tell me about where you are, and do you see yourself with this team, right? It's being able to engage in those conversations in an authentic manner that really helps folks understand where they are in the school and on the team. Because ultimately, folks get up every day and want to do a good job, and sometimes they don't have the capacity to do the job that they want to do. And it's your job to determine that as the leader in the building. It's your job to kind of use the dipstick assessment. Think of an oil change, and you go in to check in to see if it's clean or dirty. Similarly, with like folks and where they are, you have to be doing these types of assessments all the time with your team to determine, oh, they just need an oil change, or oh, this car is, it's just not going to happen. You have to figure it out, but you always have to be authentic. And if you operate yourself as a leader with personal regard, with respect, and with integrity, folks know when you're being true and authentic with them and when you're not, because it's the way in which you have to operate as a leader. Folks will only do what you do if you're mirroring it for them. Another thing to consider in building an effective team for a transformational school is the importance of school rituals for adults. We oftentimes center ourselves thinking about what's important for our young people, which of course is the focus of the work. But we also need to consider the importance of ritual for our adults in our building, because adults are human, and adults need to feel supported, acknowledged, and in a space where community is important. So one such example, in all of your meetings or in all ways in which you gather, there should be some agreements, some community agreements. For example, at our site, we have two: operational agreements and relational agreements. Operational agreements are the business end, right? You start and end on time, no interruptions, no cell phones, that type of stuff. The relational agreements are the agreements that help folks get into relationship with each other. And if you're modeling that as the site leader at the onset of every meeting, it helps and reminds people that this is what we're about. It helps folks get to the idea of a professional learning community. So here's an example. Tell the truth without blame or judgment. So oftentimes when I'm meeting with new folks and I have some data to share, perhaps it's around suspension, perhaps it's around how our English language learners have performed, or around how our students with special needs have performed, I always say, I'm going to tell the truth without blame or judgment. This is not personal. Here's the data, right? It softens the blow sometimes, if you will, but it also acknowledges that this is just what it is. We're not going to get into the conversation about how it makes me feel, because we're really talking about how to be productive, right? We create opportunities and spaces about how we feel in another ritual, which I'll talk about in a moment. But being able to just name out loud, telling the truth without blame or judgment, this is how we've performed, or this is where we are, or this is what I heard, is one such agreement that you could have. Being open to outcome, not attached to outcome, is the second agreement that we have. That's the hardest one for folks to digest, because we go into a meeting and we want to be able to come out with something complete. But sometimes that's not possible when it's a big project, or when it's something that's ongoing, or if it's something that you're experimenting and piloting. You have to be able to tell folks, be open to the possibility that we will arrive, but also know that we may not, and that's okay too. That kind of takes the pressure off folks a little, and are like, I can actually be engaged in this learning process. That's another agreement you might want to consider offering up to your team. And the third agreement, of course, is to pay attention to heart and meaning. What is someone saying in this meeting? And what does it mean for them, right? That's that element of self-awareness that you have to really be in tune to, that you can't always respond to what someone is saying or thinking, because it's an opportunity for them to process. Pay attention principles. It's not always about you, right? That's the biggest challenge of being a leader, is being able to isolate the difference between what's about you and what's about someone else, and not taking any of it personal. These agreements are really great ways to help build a community of folks who are actually going to stay engaged in the work of learning as adults. And they are very nicely aligned to how we experience learning as adults, through adult learning theory, of course. So having these community agreements are really important. That's how you open meetings. How you close meetings is just as important as well. So there are 3 ways in which you can close a meeting that I do a combination of all 3 at all times. Number 1 is acknowledge, like, we might have some business announcements to make. Open up the floor so that different people in the room can make their general announcements in a space where everybody could be heard. Takes a few moments. Second, appreciate. Open up the space so that folks can appreciate each other publicly. When I first started with appreciation 7 years ago in a public setting, it was always just silent. I would say 1 or 2 appreciations to model. Very general ones, though, because as a principal, you don't want to get too specific, because folks will say, oh, she appreciated this person, that person, and now she's got favorites, or he has favorites. But before you know it, once you build a momentum, folks are appreciating each other out loud. I appreciate how I had a cup of coffee in my hand and you opened up the door for me so that I wouldn't drop my bag. Like, that might seem odd, but that goes a long way for someone when they're having a memory down the hall of, oh, and this person is always using the copier at this time. Oh, but they actually opened up the door for me, right? It starts to create opportunities for people to think about each other as humans in the work. Before you know it, you've got folks appreciating each other for collaboration, or I visited your classroom and I learned this, or I thank you for calling me when I was sick. You have just a plethora and a wealth of genuine human exchange about things that we take for granted on the day-to-day as we're serving young people all day long. This is a great ritual to have. And lastly, always try and do some kind of a raffle. Some sort of a ritual that says, hey, we're just going to have a little fun. There's that pleasure point in the brain, right? The brain likes fun. Everybody gets a raffle ticket. You pull it out. It's a $5 gift card to Starbucks. Or I'm going to cover your class for 10 minutes any given time. It's your choice. You put it on my calendar. These are all fun rituals and ways to say, hey, I acknowledge you. You work really hard. I care about you and your humanity. We appreciate each other publicly. And let's get some of those and the announcements for the type A folks, right, who need to get stuff out. That's an opening with here's how we agree to be in the community agreements, and a closing with here's how we end all meetings. Rituals are critical for building an effective team. They actually hold the bookends of how you function as a school. So something you also might want to consider as you think about building an effective team. Having a standard agenda is another component of that. As you're looking at this agenda, you'll notice that there are the opening and the closing pieces of how to have an effective meeting, which lends itself to building an effective team. You'll see that there are the community agreements at the opening, along with an offering, which is usually a quote that gets folks' minds into the meeting, and then also the closing at the end. It does some celebrations and some nuts and bolts pieces for those type A folks. Most agendas also contain an emotional processing model for constructivist listening, which is in the form of a dyad. Dyads are other rituals that you might want to consider that help folks build an effective team so that people can tell the truth without blame or judgment, be open to outcome, not attached to outcome, can pay attention to heart and meaning, because they know that in this meeting, there's going to be a structure where my voice can be heard, right? So for example, you might want to ask a question like, tell about a time when you struggled in school. And you're going to get into the constructivist dyad configuration, which are two folks speaking with each other. Confidentiality is maintained. You're looking at someone close. There's no interruptions. There's no judgment. It's just an opportunity to be listened to. That is one highly effective community building strategy that you can embed in your agenda that will actually help people get into the work of learning and being productive with each other. And it builds a team. It builds a team because people are actually all experiencing the same thing. You'd be surprised what comes out of the dyad structure for folks who have to digest things that have happened. And especially when professional development is happening at the end of the week, at the end of a day, on a Friday, or in the middle of the week on a Wednesday, which is when we have professional development for teachers. Folks are exhausted, or folks are just wanting to get home. Folks are human. You have to really be strategic in how you create your agenda so that it's conducive to learning. It's conducive for adults engaging in meaningful work together to push our young people forward. So in order to have an effective school, you need to have something called relational trust. It's this invisible connective tissue that holds a school together. And having rituals and having consistency and predictability all contribute, but most importantly, you have to have some attributes. I'm going to discuss those now. So as you think about relational trust in school, the first, of course, always starts with you, the centrality of the principal. And this is really about how the principal interacts and behaves with adults. People don't want to see you as arbitrary or flippant. People want to see you as someone who's steady and consistent, which is why the importance of self-awareness is critical in this centrality of the principal. If you respond or react in a manner that's quick, or in a manner that's hostile, or if you show on your face that you're stressed all the time, folks are not going to be able to see you as an anchor or as a centered person. They're going to have other ideas about how you are. And you may actually be experiencing all those things that folks are thinking, but you actually just can't show it. Because at the end of the day, you're the person that they're going to be coming to. I like to think about this as kind of Disneyland, right? You get into character. You go to Disneyland and you meet with one of the characters and they're fully in character. The earth could be shaking and they would still be goofy, right? Same as the principal. Whenever there's a situation or a crisis, you have to show that you're centered. You have to show that you're in control. This, believe it or not, builds relational trust in schools, because then folks know that you're the person that they can come to no matter what the situation is. I've had folks come into my office who've lost a family or a loved one, who have immediately found out that they were going to be divorced, or someone in their family has been really sick, and they walk into my office and they can sit down and say to me, all of these things are happening, and they know that I can hold it for them and hold a space for them to be fully human. That shows that I have personal regard for you and your humanity, not just as an employee or as a worker, but that I genuinely care, because I do. Always follow up with a call or an email, or if someone has a baby, celebrate that birth. If someone passes, go to their services or send flowers. Do something to show that you genuinely care about the humanity of that person. It goes a really long way, and folks then know that they can trust you. And it starts to build that connective tissue that's invisible to the eye, but is there and binds everything together. One of the things to think about in having a school that's effective and is steeped in relational trust is having authentic parent engagement. This is probably one of the most challenging, because parents are working, parents are busy just like you are, and you have to figure out ways through that schedule to engage them in a manner that's authentic. And so what I mean by that is, it's not just to make phone calls home when kids are in trouble, or it's not just to say, can you donate this? It's really to say, I want to engage in you in a way that helps us as the educator learn. What if we actually believe that parents could be our teachers? They know more about their children than we do because they've been with them longer. What if we actually found ways to enlist them and say, parents, we value you as a member of our team. It's a collective team to help our young people get to university, and we need to be in a symbiotic relationship with each other that's about both the positive and the negatives at all times to engage with you. So one way in which to engage with parents and families is to have an open door policy. So if a parent has a concern, sometimes they're positive, sometimes they're not, they know that they can come in and say, I need to meet with Ms. Garcia, or I need to meet with the principal. Can I meet with her now? If not, when can I meet with her? And know that the front office team is going to be really responsive to that because they know how much the parent is valued in that relationship. Having activities that are not just about student learning. Of course, kids are in school to learn, but also having activities like karaoke night, where you host families to come into your school to just be with their children together and to be with you together, to see that we're all in this together. Having a fun activity that doesn't require parents to work a booth or to donate hot dogs, but just says, hey parents, we want to be with you in partnership. We want to get to know you better. That's another way to have authentic parent engagement. Another way to have authentic parent engagement is to make sure that parents know what's happening in the school in terms of their child's education. So if they have a question or a concern, they're able to voice it in a manner that's public. So having an effective parent advisory council and having parents on that council who bring up concerns are super important. It's super important to know that they have a voice and that they're members of the team. It's also very challenging, and it's something that needs to be on the forefront of your thinking as a leader, because there are so many other obstacles with schedules that you need to consider when you're making opportunities for parents to engage in the school. So for example, do you have a Saturday class? Or do you have a Saturday meeting? Do you have 2 meetings? Do you have a meeting in the morning for folks who maybe work graveyard, and then a meeting at night for folks who work during the day? How frequent are your meetings? How do you also encourage families to come into the school site with you is another thing to think about with parent engagement. Let's remember that if you're in an urban school and you're serving populations that have been underserved, who have perhaps been in this country, their relationship with school is going to be markedly different than someone who's not coming from that demographic. They may not have had the most positive experience in school, and it's your job and your team's job to enlist them in this process to say, hey, I recognize it. When you came to school, maybe it wasn't so positive, but now I want to have this positive exchange with you. I can think of many encounters with parents where as a teacher first, when I'd make a phone call home and it was positive, and they'd say, why are you calling? Why are you saying this? Aren't you only supposed to call when my kid's in trouble? That's the perception. What happens is we start to shift perception and transform what has always been to something that is potentially and radically different. These are all ways that you can engage parents and families. We've had opportunities where parents come in and they host a workshop. They're the expert, right? So it's tapping into Luis Moll's funds of knowledge. What are the funds of knowledge of this community? We had parents come in and teach our students how to make calaveras for Dia de los Muertos. We've had parents come in and teach nutrition workshops. We've had parents come in and teach sewing class. There are so many things and a wealth of expertise that our parents have that we can use and integrate in the school setting. Those are things that you need to consider as you think about authentic parent engagement in your school. Another component to consider for relational trust is the size of your school. It's so much easier to navigate a small school so that you can build relationships and alliances than it is when you're in an enormous school. Small schools tend to be 600 and below. 350, 400 is really ideal, but also very challenging for a budget. But small schools, anything below 600 is manageable, difficult, but manageable for a principal. This is important because it helps with the centrality piece, because you can build relationships much more readily and easily with parents, with students, and with teachers. It's really important that you know the students in your building, not just the students who are sent to your office, but all the students. Take some time to learn their names. Take some time to engage with them outside of school. Go to quinceañeras, go to baptisms, go to events that you're invited to. Become part of that community. That's the beauty of a small school. It's much more challenging to do that in an enormous school. The research also shows that small schools tend to cultivate really tight networks beyond school when kids have graduated and promoted. Those are things to consider when you're thinking about the small school. In addition to that, having a small school makes it much easier to kind of cut through the red tape. Depending on the organization that you sit in, there are bureaucratic things that are dealt with when you sit in a school system. It's part of being in education in this country. However, how you navigate that in a small school is much more accessible in a quick manner as opposed to doing it in a much larger school. You're able to just kind of pick up the phone and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking, this is what I need, can you help me in this manner? Small schools are really, really ideal for building relational trust and for showing that it's possible to do something very different as opposed to the large schools. In a large school, oftentimes you're not able to, as a site leader, know kids personally, know families personally, know teachers personally. It becomes much more challenging just because the numbers are so much larger. Those are things to consider around relational trust. Another component of relational trust in school is having a stable school community. Research shows that for a school to maintain a system, a principal needs to be in place for 5 years. This is also true for teachers in positions. If you'd like to see your school transform and be able to move and make academic gains for young folks, you actually have to be invested in your school. Folks who work there have to be invested, and invested for the long haul, not for a short period of time, because lasting change only happens after 5 years. If folks, for whatever reason can't stay, that's understandable. They have to move, relocate, or perhaps it just wasn't the right fit. That's all fine and appropriate. But if you're an anchored leader at a school site and you're invested in it for a long period of time, folks are going to see that. Families and communities are going to see that. And it stabilizes the perception of school. And it really helps build relational trust. I've been in the school for 7 years that I'm currently at. And I've now graduated, siblings. And so families know, that's Miss Garcia. She's here. My younger child is going to come into the school, and we look forward to you being here again. This really helps send this message of we're here, we're in control, we know what we're doing, and we have a long-term plan. Helping people want to stay in your school, teachers, has everything to do with the effective team. If folks feel like they're engaged in meaningful work, that they're valued, and that they're growing and thriving, they want to stay. It's when folks feel that they're not that they decide they want to look elsewhere. Particularly now when we see so many different instructional options for teachers, it's really important that the principal that the principal stays where they are, as well as also stays on top of all the new learning that's happening with 21st century learning in terms of incorporating technology, learning different strategies to think outside of the box. If the principal's engaged in that, teachers are going to be engaged in that, families and students are going to be engaged in that, and they're going to know that this is a place where they can be developed. You see that, and it helps stabilize the school and the community. And schools need stable communities so that kids can thrive. The final component of relational trust is voluntary association, right? And this is where your community agreements really help you, because you can also tell the truth without blame or judgment here with a teammate who perhaps isn't the right fit. There's many ways in which you can tell somebody that they're not the right fit, but the best way to do it is to just be really honest and to be kind while doing it. Sometimes folks sign up to be at a school site and they think that this is what it's about, but when they actually get into the work, they realize this is about something else, right? Because hard work looks different for all of us, from all of us. Collaboration might look different to all of us differently. When folks sometimes sign up and say, this is what I thought I was doing, and recognize this isn't what I want to do, it's okay to let them go. In fact, it's a good thing to let them go, because you want people to be where you are, aligned to the mission. And if they're not aligned to the mission, it doesn't make them a bad person. It just makes them the person that's not the right person for the team, right? And then you find someone else who's the appropriate and who has the same mindset and the same values to move the school forward. There's an article that I have as an anchor article for my teachers that I always suggest to new principals to find. What's your anchor article? What's the article that you present to folks and say, this is who we are? So there's an article called Wanksters, Writers, and Gangsters, or Gangsters, Writers, and Wanksters, Jeff Andrade Duncan. And I always offer it up in interviews and I say, have you heard of this? You might want to take a look at this. This is what we're about. We're looking for people who are writers. We're looking for people who are all in, who are here to interrupt the inequities in education that have been happening for too many generations. We're here because we're lifelong learners. We're here because we care about the future of our young people. And sure, of course, you're in an interview, you're going to say yes, yes, yes. But the more you talk about it in professional development, the more you're anchored to that vision and mission and that article that says this is who we are, the more people start to realize, oh, maybe this is not the place for me. And I always say, towards the end of the year, as folks are signing their intent to return forms, if this is not the place for you, I will write you, and you've done good work here, you've been a part of the team, I will write you a glowing letter of recommendation if you want to find another place to be in the world. That's the importance of voluntary association. Honor and have personal regard for the folks who have worked for you, and also recognize when it's time for them to move on and help them to move on in a manner that's humane and in a manner that's honest. We've talked a lot about the importance of team as it is the centerpiece of transforming a school. Of course, we've also mentioned that you have to have some self-awareness in order to do that. Lastly, what we're going to conclude with is the skill set necessary in order to launch all of this work. And when I talk about skill sets, I'm talking about, do you have the capacity as the site leader to build in systems and operations to make sure that everybody can do their best job? So you might have the most fabulous team on earth, but if you don't have systems and operations down, that team is not going to be able to flourish. So it could be the cart before the horse or the other way around, however you want to perceive it. However, what's most important is that you have the capacity to build in systems. So systems look like master schedule. What does your master schedule reflect? That it mirrors the value of your vision. If you have a vision that's about lifelong learning and collaboration, does your master schedule reflect that? Do your courses offer extended periods of learning time? Do you have built-in time for your teachers to collaborate? If not, you need to rethink that structure so that it mirrors and matches what it is that you want kids and adults to do. And if you don't know how to build a master schedule yourself, you need to find somebody who can. That's the self-awareness piece. If you know, oh, I don't know how to do it. I know it's important, but I don't know how to do it. I need to find somebody who can. That's totally fine and appropriate. But if you can identify what your areas of strength and weaknesses are in building systems and operation, you won't be able to launch forward that beautiful team that you've just assembled. Second consideration to think about with systems and operations, what are your systems around the front office and how teachers get materials and supplies? Perhaps you haven't even thought about this, but this is something that's very, very important for teachers. How does the front office respond to the needs of the school? Are they proactive or reactive? What I mean by proactive is, do they have some way of asking at the beginning of a school year, what are all the materials that you might need this year and how might I order them in a manner that's on time? Or are they reactive and just say, okay, teachers, just send me what you need when you need it, and then we have to wait a couple of days till it arrives? How have you trained the people in the front office? What is it that you want them to deliver on a daily basis for that teaching team, right? These are all systems that you need to be thinking about. Do we have a system for how we order? Do we have a system for how we make requests? Do we have a system for teacher phone calls to and from the home when teachers need translation? Do we have those systems? Again, if this is not your area of strength, then your right hand or your left hand needs to be the person who's building up that front office team so that teachers can be really effective. Another system to consider is discipline. How do we approach discipline at our school? Are we fully immersed in restorative justice? Or are we just using components of it? Or are we very traditional? And what does that mean for me as a site leader? What do I value in this model for discipline? And who is the person who's going to support discipline throughout the school, right? These are all just kind of some basic systems that you need to be thinking through as a site leader, but also recognizing what are the areas that are my areas of strength that I'm going to own, and what are the areas that I need to delegate. An effective principal knows when to delegate and how to delegate, and also knows how to train people so that the work or the vision that they're holding can be fully executed in the manner that they see, but also knows when to release. So I've delegated this to you, and I don't need to micromanage you, and I just need to release you to do it because I trust you. If you have all of those things that we've talked about, the relational trust, the self-awareness of what your strengths and weaknesses are as a principal, and the ability to set up systems, you're able to actually catapult a school really relatively quickly into a more transformative place for our young people.